Peace and blessings. This is Misael Bay, aka Warlock Asylum, coming at you once again with another episode of the Simon Necronomicon lessons. This will be lesson number 3, Secrets about the Bandar, aka the Watcher. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. We're going to be making a continuation. There's so much stuff that I always find out every time I open up the Necronomicon by Simon. And it's really been an amazing process over the years. And hopefully you'll find these videos informative and you'll be able to gain some insight into your experience based on the information presented herein. Okay. So I'm going to do another screen share so we can look at the online copy of the Necronomicon, because there are a lot of secrets about the Watcher that are being exposed here for the first time. Okay, and these are not necessarily get into ritual, but they will greatly increase and enhance your practice. Okay, and let me do a screen share again, and we're going to go right into, as you could see, the conjuration of the Watcher. This is what we're going into now. And outside of the general instructions, let me see something here. It's a lot of interesting things I find on this page, but outside from the general instructions, let's go a little further down. And it says, let me put that down, that the Watcher comes from a race different from that of man, and yet different from that of gods. And it is said that he was with Kingu and his hordes at the time of the war between the worlds, but was dissatisfied and then cleave unto the armies of Lord Marduk. I think there's been a lot of excellent essays written up about this. One of the ones I enjoyed the most, having a great experience with Sumeria and ancient Mesopotamia, was a lot of the work that Michael Ford put together in Mascom Zul, where he talks about these same forces. However, this passage, I'm going to read it over again. The Watcher comes from a race different from that of man, and yet different from that of the gods. And it is said that he was with Kingu and his hordes. So what is Kingu and his hordes? But before we even get into that, let me just go a little bit further into another aspect of the text. And it says, and the Watcher sometimes, and the Watcher appears sometimes as a great and fierce dog who prowls about the gate or the circle, frightening away the Edamu who forever lurk about the barriers waiting for sacrifice. And the Watcher aloof the sword of flames, and even the elder gods are awed thereby. And sometimes the Watcher appears as a man in a long robe, shaven, with eyes that never lose their stare. And the Lord of the Watchers dwells, as it said, amongst the wastes of the Agigis, and only watches and never raises the sword or fights the Edamu, save when the covenant is invoked by none less than the elder gods in their council, like unto the 7 glorious Akfalu. So I think the Falu is also called Abgail, and here those are watchers. We know those are watchers. So what is being said here in these different descriptions of watchers is that there's different methods or different types of watchers that could be invoked. If a person is skilled enough. I don't really like to convey this information, but let's just say that we were to look at this passage again. The Watcher comes from a race different from that of men, and yet different from that of the gods. Okay. How is that question answered? Okay, let me stop for a second. Let me stop the share screen. How is that question answered? The watcher comes from a race that is different from man and different from the gods. Okay. In order for us, to get ideas of what the watch is in plain and simple terms, let's take a look back at another part of the text, which I'm going to pull up here. And you probably, when you see it, like, oh man, I never thought of it that way. But it's in the testimony of the mad Arab. Let's see. Um, okay, let's get back into this. I'm going to share my screen again and we're back on. Okay, great. So we're back into the testimony of the mad Arab, part one. And in the opening lines, he says right here, let all who read this book be warned thereby that the habitations of men are seen and surveyed by that ancient race of gods and demons. So when you look back into the um, conjuration of the watcher, and we realize that the watcher can turn on somebody, right? Then we know that it's not the race of man and it's not the race of gods. So then we know that it is the race of demons, you know what I'm saying, who, not in the Christian term, but in the true term of being a genie. So the watcher pretty much is like the race of the jinn. So that's a pretty much clear indication. I may have been called something different in ancient times, and that's just what it is. But here's another secret I'm going to share with you. I'm going to pull up another page, and this is very explosive, what we're about to cover, because it answers a question that has long been um, asked by people. And so I just want to get this definitely out of the way. Let me pull this up. Sorry. Okay. And we'll go back into this again and we'll click over here. Okay. I'm going to the share screen. Boom. There we go. All right. So I'm getting better at it. All right. So in this discussion, right, the reason why I keep reading this verse is because there's something important that a lot of people miss when reading this verse. So let's go back over it in retrospect to what we saw in the testimony of the mad Arab. It said the watchers comes from a race different from man, and yet different from the gods. Now, the mad Arab just said that there's an ancient race who's watching man, ancient race of gods and demons. So if it's not the gods, then it's the demons in the sense of referencing them as genie. That's it. It's that simple. But here's something else about this. A lot of times people wonder, and I'm just speaking for people who have experience with the tome, the Necronomicon tome, they always say, hey man, you know, it says that you're not supposed to petition or summon a deity until you walk the gate of that deity. It says that, right? But then you talk to people, hey man, how'd you learn about the Simon Necronomicon? Oh, well, I tried the 50 names in the spell book. So how is it that a person could use the spell book, the 50 names of Marduk, if they haven't walked to the gate of Marduk? Is because those 50 names are watchers that could be invoked to govern the ceremony. And Simon gives it away because in the gates of Necronomicon, it says that when you walk a gate, you're supposed to receive the name of one of the 50 names. So that tells you, like what the situation is, but that's like completely missed. Okay, but that's an option. I would say that's option more for like a person who's walked. You know what I'm saying? You know, like, let me use one of the names to govern this ceremony or whatever. And that's why people can use the 50 names, because they're watchers. And it says that they're careful watchers of the outside. So when a person works with the 50 name, he's actually working with the watchers, but he doesn't realize it. You know what I'm saying? It's not the same watcher that is summoning a normal invocation of the watcher, right? But it's a watcher. Now, accordingly to the Necronomicon files, Dan Harms and John Goinks, was it Wisdom Goinks III, said that at a meeting, Simon supposedly said on the tape that one of the banishing rituals of the pentagram could be used. You know, he was asked that question and it was agreed, yeah, that can be used. But I tend to think that when you look at the title of the tome and everything else, and stuff that we discussed yesterday, there are various types of watchers that could be called, but the personal watcher that one should call is mentioned in this, um, sorry, in this normal incantation, which really being called is Kerr. You know what I'm saying? That's what's really being called. And so that's a whole different dynamic right there. And I'm going to share another screen with y'all because it gets into the situation with what's the watcher. We know the watcher, when the three sigils of Mash are described, the watcher is interchangeable with the word Bandar. Now, when I first started the blog page back in 2007, um, information on what the word Bandar meant was oblivious. There was no information at all, and a lot of us thought, which I had wrote some posts on, was possibly it was a combined term, like with band and dar, and those do have separate meanings. Delightfully, however, in my travels in Nzu, I was able to come across some information that there is a term bandar. You know what I'm saying? And this is just coming to light. Now, before I go into this information, because I did use it in a blog post, it is in a book called the Buddhanomicon. And I'm going to read an excerpt of that book that talks about the bandar and what it is. And it's undeniably, this is what this meant. However, one of the things I want to say is that we do know, based on the chapter about the Watcher, that more than likely a lot of what we see in the Necronomicon is not of modern day invention. And I'm not talking about the fact that there's incantations from Mesopotamia, because anyone could look that up. You know, like, it was difficult at that time because you have to imagine that this book came into production in the 70s, right? And so, you know, they didn't have the internet in the 70s. If you want a book that was, and they didn't have books on Samaria at the library like that. If you wanted to get a book about Samaria, that was one thing. If you wanted to get a book about the incantations in Samaria, that was a whole other thing. And you had to know what you was looking for. So in other words, you had to, if you lived at a distance, you had to be able to write to a library, tell them what pages you need, and they can send you a copy of it. That's how that was done. It wasn't like no research on the internet. You know what I'm saying? So it's very interesting. That's a lot of research. And I doubt that the source that this came from in 1908, and it's describing within 2 pages um, the Veda cult of the dead, it's almost impossible that someone could pull that in the 70s. So more than likely, the fact that the watcher is conjoined with the term bandar in the description of the three sigils of Mashu lets us know that it's just not a modern invention, that some parts of that text was grafted in and maybe the rest was filled out, you know. So let's get into this. I'm going to go into my share screen again, and you'll see the article pop up. I'm going to put it in the link in the description. In the article, The Bandar, A Hidden Necronomicon Trap, excerpt from the Buddhanomicon. Very beautiful imagery, very beautiful book. If you get a chance, it's like a sequel to the Atlantean Necronomicon. It's just ridiculous. And it tells us, this says this in the Testimony of the Mad Arab. I'll start here. It says the third sign is the sigil of the Watcher. It is called Bandar. The Watcher is a race sent by the Elder Ones. It keeps vigil while one sleeps, provided the appropriate ritual and sacrifice has been performed. Else, if called, it will turn on thee. So it's not a holy guardian angel. It's not um, a deity. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Now, let me just straighten out something here, because yesterday we were talking and, it came up that Nagal's name means the Great Watcher, and that the Necronomicon is the Book of Kutha, so more than likely it's the Book of Nagal, which is true. That is true. And however, there is something else to consider, is that Nagal sometimes was used interchangeably with the underworld, with the term underworld. So Nagal can mean the specific personified deity, or it could mean the entire underworld, right? So let's take a look at um, this information about the Bandar that was recently put out. Like, you can find it on Google book searches. You can look up the term Bandar cult and you can come across it. You know what I'm saying? And it says this in this page. It says, published in 1908 under the direction of the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, was a series entitled Man, a Monthly Record of Anthropological Science. So someone in the 70s was able to pull this information from 1908 out of England. Let's continue. A monthly record of anthropological science. In volume 3 of this work, under the subtopic Note on the Bandar, Cult of the Canolan Sinhalese by C.C. Segliam, M.D., we read, in a paper on the Veda cult of the dead, published in the Transactions of the Third International Congress for the History of Religions, I alluded to the practice prevalent among the Kandiling Sinhalese, that is, of the Sinhalese and of the central portion of the island, of canonizing important men soon after their death and making offering to their spirits, who are invoked to protect from evil and send good fortune. Such canonized spirits are known as Bandar. Okay, that makes sense, because if Nagal is called the Great Watcher, right, and these spirits are men or women sometimes who passed, then we understand the normal invocation of the Watcher, which says, "Sleep, cease to be the sleeper of Agura." Cease to lie unwaking beneath the mountains of Ker, because Ker represent the entire underworld. You see what I'm saying? And the guy was the ruler of that underworld. But here's something that we should take in consideration. I will continue. Such canonized spirits known as Bandar and Mr. H. Parker, late of the Irrigation Department, who was devoted special attention to the subject, writes that he has the names considerably more than 100. Some are included in the list as important ancestors, others, the majority, because of their power, others because of their cruelty or the sudden violent deaths. They are all classed as yakas by the Sinhalese and are generally hurtful, but some have protective functions and protect cattle, coconut trees, and crops. Okay. The article continues. So let me continue with it. It says, before the dead can manifest their power in this manner or in any way interfere with human affairs, they must obtain permission of one or more high gods, of whom the most important is Skanda, one of the four deities of Ceylon. The Tanrara God. Now, the deity, the most important one that must be petitioned, is also called the Red One. It's a Martian deity, just like Nergal. You can look it up. It's just this deity they're talking about, Kataragam, is the equivalent to, it's the Senegalese equivalent to Nergal. Okay, this is absolutely amazing to discover this, because when I was first started out in Necronomicon studies, this information just wasn't available, but it does reveal a huge a lesson in how the Watchers are being treated, which I'll discuss in a second. Let me continue. Having obtained permission from the Kataragam god to accept offerings and to help or injure men, the spirit indicates his desire to be revered as a Bandar and at a shamanic ceremony, which is held when the doings of the sending or other mysterious events, such that one of the dead is trying to communicate with the living, and talks about a spirit dancer takes possession of the individual and stuff like that. And this is right here is just truly amazing information, because there's so many different ways that this could be broken down. But I would say one thing is that however the Necronomicon came about, and that's going to be a subject we'll discuss shortly in a future video. However it came about, it was ingeniously put together, because that's actually was a practice in Sumer, where they believed that the kings were the mediators. So the kings that had divine lineage that was said to descend from deities like Gilgamesh, they were put as rulers. Like, it makes sense. Hey, we're not going to be here anymore. We'll put our children here to rule, even though they're half human. We're going to put them to rule, that sort of thing. So that makes perfect sense, you know. And that was the situation. But they were mediators, and that went on into their post life. You see what I'm saying? A lot of people look at the epics of Gilgamesh and they look at what Enkidu was doing, and it gets a little twisted. But if you really look at the whole dynamic, that was a definitely solid belief. So what they're saying about the Bandar isn't any less than what was practiced in ancient Sumerian. Here's something else that is very, very, very interesting. When you look at the ancestral role of generations, okay, this is what happened in the Christian religion with Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ represents the personification. If you look at the titles of Jesus Christ, Son of God, all those are Sumerian titles, right? The Great Shepherd, they're talking about the movie. So what Jesus is he's a personification of all the dead kings that existed in the age of Pisces. That's what he represents. And he's the mediator between Pisces and the era before it of Aries. He's the mediator between that, like between the previous worlds, right? It's not even an individualized him, it's a personification. So in the same way, it's possible that Nagal was a personification also of the whole netherworld, which is how it's utilized, as we mentioned. And it's kind of interesting because even it also shows that the ancient people of Mesopotamia, they had some depth of knowledge, because Mars, Nagal, is associated with iron. And that's fine, because when you look at Mars, it has a red color because it's like iron oxidized sands and stuff like that. But the other thing about it, knowing that, Erishkigal in the realm of Ker definitely was talking about chthonic worship. And as we discussed the other day in the section of the Necronomicon, it talks about the goddess of witches, and, that the goddess of witches comes in two forms in the Necronomicon. One is Inanna Ishtar, and the other one is Tiamat, whose power, the dragon-like power of her, is raised in ritual. And then it's amalgamated with the Ishtarian energy, or the will of the of the practitioner to move into a certain direction. But these are chthonic things. So when you think about chthonic, you're talking about the earth, the inner earth, the dragon currents that lie in the earth. And guess what? In the middle of the earth, in the core of the earth, is iron ore, a property of Nagao. So we can see that, this is very intense stuff. Now, I want to go back into the screen share because I want to discuss something that definitely takes a little bit of wisdom to understand. Let me see if this is it. I might have to pull back on this one. Okay, so we can see, as mentioned in the information, about the Bandar being the dead kings, the important people, that were canonized as part of the worship, and they had to get permission, is why it says, come by Anu, come by Anil, come by Inki. But it really says in here, for this person, for this energy to cease to lie unwakened beneath the mountains of Ker, from the Bisam Na Maratu. Okay. And also it says, it talks about, let me see if I can try to figure this out here. It was yes, this one. Cease to be the sleeper of Agura. Agura are the dark waters of Kara. The dark waters stir. Okay. So, this definitely has, an element that is very primordial. You know what I'm saying? But it's still righteous because when you read about the Bandar, even though it was being called, it's like a Christian calling Christ. It's just a little bit more of a primal right. You know what I'm saying? It's calling something or someone who had power at a previous time to work with the more than likely ancestors. Now, there's something else I want to cover, so I'm going to share my screen again because thoughts are coming as we're reviewing this information. And this is a very important thing, and it's never been talked about in the history of the tradition. So why don't we talk about it now? And let me get this on again. Okay, and this is the situation with the Watcher. Hold on one second. Let me go back down. Okay, and I think it's at the top. So let me move my screen out of the way. Okay, and it says that this is the book of the Congregational Watcher, and it says later that the spirit does not rise up against the priest, and for this reason, a preliminary sacrifice must be made in a clean and new bowl with the appropriate sigils described thereupon, being the 3 gray carved symbols of the rock of my initiation, which are such and such and such. So these 3 symbols is actually the gate to the outside. You know what I'm saying? The gate that breaks our reality. So when it says, be careful not to open the gate, whatever, it means like, don't be using this all the time. This represents the gate to the outside. If you go into the first testimony of the Mad Arab and you read what are these 3 symbols, it would say these 3 symbols are the gate to the outside. So anytime he says, do not open the gate to the outside or take special precautions when opening the gate to the outside, think before you're doing something. Okay. The sacrifice of bread, that's something that's said to be, it's said for the novice, it's said for the beginner, but really when you get insight into the Watcher and what it is, and also let me not forget, because I'm looking down at, because I see that the grass olivos should be burned, which is stinging nettles. Okay, and that's was brought out in the Necronomicon files, and they really did some research to pull that up at that time. So I always bigged up their book because even as criticism about the Simon Necronomicon, you learn a lot of different things, on that level. So let me say this. So to the novice, a bread, oh man, that's a sacrifice bread. But to someone who has experience, bread is just a part of it. When you create a pathway for the watcher to operate in your experience, your level of sacrifice and space reserved for the watcher should be identical, if not more, than someone who's working with Santa Marta. It should be flowers. It should be, cigars. It should be, you should really, now if you don't have anything, you know what I'm saying? And you don't have that type of time, you don't have that type of setup, you don't have that type of household, then yeah, you just burn some bread. But if you really want to create a relationship with this energy and really make it like a part of the family, then you need to get out the tequila, cigarro. You should get a couple of things together, to kind of make a sacred space in your house, right? Now, I don't want anyone get confused because I mentioned Santa Marta. That shouldn't even be, those are two separate things. And the worst thing a person can do is bring something in with something else, as far as like addressing something as something. In the Necronomicon, it's kind of amazing. It does give a person room to worship their god and goddess. But for me personally, um, that's also identified in the first testimony of the Mad Arab. And let me just turn this back on. Sorry. And it's just, I don't know, I just have a thing with that. But technically, from what Simon says in Gates of Necronomicon, a person could worship his own personal deities, even if they're not Sumerian of origin. And there's many instances that the Mad Arab demonstrated that this tome, and this is one of them, this is like technically I can trace similar rites in Sumer, but on a historical foundation, the Bandar is not something from Sumer. And this is why I say that, like, just in the concept, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's still called under the name of Enki Enlil Anu, but the fact that that word is in there, um, it's sort of like, you know, you have a little bit of Hindu, like we have certain things that work together and it's constructed in a way where it's complete, it's its own system, you know what I'm saying? And and it's a complete vibration, it's a certain vibration, you know what I'm saying? And there's a lot of things that fit in that, but it's not just Sumerian, you know what I'm saying? And that's not unpopular for cults to practice. It's not unpopular that a cult may incorporate an energy that's foreign into its paradigm. That's not uncommon, nor is that called chaos magic, because it's incorporated in a way where it's an essential part of the complete system. So the Watcher calling is the essential part, is one of the essential parts of the system. Now, if a person doesn't really want to open curve, they can, work with 50 name or something like that. Or maybe they can even call it the Ikfalu. I don't have all of that experience with that. I think when like it becomes something else, because Necronomicon, its name is based on Law of the Dead, Book of the Laws of the Dead. So you're dealing with a primal chthonic right, an underworld right. It's not, and from the underworld, it kind of, let me slow it down a little bit. But in the gates of the Necronomicon, he says the underworld can mean two things. It can mean outer space or below. We just learned that the Chaldean covenant uh, gives a person permission to access both of those worlds. So that idea is definitely in sync with what the text says itself. You know what I'm saying? But let me share something else with you, since we did discuss the god and goddess. The main thing is that what y'all want to do is just stick with what's outlined in the book. There are certain traps in here, and there's a huge trap in here. Not in this section, but there's definitely in this section, yes, also because it's not obvious that I've worked with people and it was just not obvious that they were calling something from the land of Ker. They're not obvious about this, right? So definitely research and study is important. But let's look into the God and Goddess question. Let's answer that before closing this down. Because you're going to see where the Mad Arab called his God and Goddess. And it's very, 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 very simple. Let me take a look here. Let me just do a word find so I can find this quickly. I hope you guys are having a good day out there. It's definitely okay. This is real simple, and I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you because in the ceremonies of calling, it said that one should open with giving petition to the God and Goddess. Now, if someone's calling the Watcher for the first time, they're not doing the ceremonies of calling. That's a whole separate rite itself. And then in the ceremonies of calling, the Watcher is invoked to preside over the ceremony. Okay. In the ceremonies of calling, it makes mention of one calling the God and Goddess. And people have asked questions, man, who is this God and Goddess that's being called? It's in the testimony of the Mad Arab. So let's take a look. Okay, let me share my screen again, bring this up. And once you see it, then you know it is what it is. So let me just share this. Okay, and this is what it says. I have summoned ghosts of my ancestors. That's interesting. He called the Bandar to real and visible appearance in the tops of temples built to reach the stars and built to touch the nethermost cavities of Hades. That's another secret. Well, that's another story. I have wrestled with the black magician Isaac Thorpe in vain and fled the earth by calling Anana and her brother Marduk Lauder. And that's the God and Goddess. That's the God and Goddess to be invoked. That's it. It's very simple. So basically, even though we're discussing the Watcher, as you're probably starting to figure out, the testimony of the Mad Arab is a blueprint of how the ritual is done. But it's said in the like it's said in the fantasy of the story of the Mad Arab, right? So that's a very, very, very interesting thing. And, it's really beautiful because you can get so much information through the fantasy side of the text, right? So the testimony of the Mad Arab is going to give you everything and how it works, some of the possibilities of what can happen, just a whole lot of different stuff. Now, as we discussed in previous videos, the Lovecraft references, which are very few, those things are just lightly built on entertainment. Some things do have some power. There have been some groups that have really explored the Lovecraftian universe, but the Necronomicon by Simon is not about Lovecraft, nor does it practitioners believe in like some fantasy that Lovecraft was putting together. You know what I'm saying? So let me just say that because a lot of people are like, oh, well, that's just something. No. In the same way that academic science has borrowed terms from over 80 fictional books to describe real scientific phenomena, occultists have been doing that for years, where they take something from a fictional book and name a grimoire or a sacred text out of it. Doesn't mean that there's a fascination that this person actually discovered something who's a fiction writer in the halfway house and sometimes had issues of prejudice. You know what I'm saying? So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the formulas of the Sumerian incantations that are found in the Simon Necronomicon. The Necronomicon was a complete game changer, if anything, and it was a game changer because of the gate walking system. It was a game changer because of the gate walking system. And that was a huge, 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 huge thing. Because people after they try to imitate the system and construct their own system, you know what I'm saying? based on the principles, and they have a right to do that. You know what I'm saying? That's not a bad thing, but it was just the Simon Tone was a huge game changer as far as when it came out. Like I would say for like a span of 25 years, that definitely was like, yo, what is this? People who were supposed to have been the most ingenious magicians couldn't figure it out. Uh, quote unquote occult organizations was calling the book a fraud, and then it turned out not to be one. You know, it was a lot of stuff that was going on in the evolution of the Simon Necronomicon. You know what I'm saying? And just to be a part of that legacy is a huge thing. You know, it's a very interesting thing. But it's also a survival, a true survival of the cult of Ishtar and the cult of Kutha, actually. So it's a very unique text, and the Watcher is still like a lot of mysteries in with the Watcher. If a person has never approached that work, you know what I'm saying? However, um, it does do work in guarding one or protecting one. The main thing is just that you don't allow that force to overtake you. You know what I'm saying? And you know, there's many different ways that that could be indicated. And I've seen people who were like possessed by the force, who let that door open too much. You know what I'm saying? My After going back and forth with the neck, working with it more devotionally, not working with it, you know, my perception on that sort of thing is like you don't need to go open the door for no reason. You only need to go open the door when you need to go somewhere. You know what I'm saying? And that's how I kind of see it. People like, oh man, you know, this happened. I heard some spirit in the bathroom. They told me this. I got a call. And all those things are jokes because here's the thing. You know, it says in the book, be careful not to open that gate. Now we know what the gate is. You know what I'm saying? And Simon says it in Gates of Necronomicon is any form of magic. You just don't want to open the gate, you know, just to be opening the gate. You know what I'm saying? Usually you want to open the gate in planetary cycles and um you know, certain events when the Earth's magnetic field could be weak, like, you know, the witches' seasons of Lamas, Beltane, times like that, and also for regular watcher, you know, however you work out your deal with the watch or whatever. Okay, you know, I want to do this on a full moon, you know, just whatever it is. It's not to be just randomly provoked every day. And the why I'm saying this is because what happened is a lot of those energies will lay low. Like if you open the gate or open something during the calling, then you should spend the entire rest of the month cleaning out from that one night. You just clean out doing cleansing work. You know what I'm saying? But if you open that gate and then you hear something in your head like, hey man, you know, this person doing this and doing that, that's just some negative energy trying to get you to open the gate again so more people can come in. You see what I'm saying? More things can come in. If you really think about it, because people say, man, this is the most powerful thing I ever worked with. Like you hear a lot of this talk or whatever. If it's really that powerful, you don't need to tap it all the time. If you really have a connection with those forces, you don't need to call them all the time. When when we were going in heavy with the neck, I used to always say that's like an insult to the energies, like just to constantly call them because they know what needs to happen. You know what I'm saying? They know uh you know, you'll know when you need to go in. You know what I'm saying? After working with it after a while. But to go in just because, well, man, this guy says this, I'm going to call the neck and all this, you're just falling for a trap by possibly the energy that you didn't feed or something like that. Because so now we're going to cause some trouble and then you scared. So now you got to open up this gate and now all these things are coming into your experience and you're consumed because you're focusing on the text. You know what I'm saying? The Necronomicon, I'm going to get into the description of the text and how it's used because there is a ways how it's used outside of ritual, outside of mysticism. So we should discuss that next week, because that's probably a next episode, because that's probably important. But the thing is that all that stuff, oh, I got to do this and I got to do that, or you constantly in the book, you probably want to study it to get familiar in the beginning, yes. But here's the thing, even though we don't like regard Lovecraft just beyond entertainment, there is a reason for some of the parables in his writing. And one of the things he said is that the Necronomicon is written on pages of flesh and the ink is blood, something to that effect. And that tells you that the Necronomicon is you. You are the Necronomicon, you know what I'm saying? And so when you look at, and this is why, like, in the introduction, the introductory notes in the Simon Necronomicon, it says that the Book of Lore was Crowley's Necronomicon, because that was a reflection of who he was, a reflection of his mind, or what came to him, because he is the Necronomicon. You start reading the books of Manly P. Hall, and he starts talking about Masonic ceremonies are actually imitations of functions that occur in the body, the physical body of man. You know what I'm saying? Now, just because you're the physical Necronomicon, the true and living, you are the Necronomicon. It doesn't mean that just you acting out is an enlightened work. You have to learn how to tap into yourself. You have to learn that every organ that exists in your body has its own mind, and it has a mind that you don't control. You see what I'm saying? Not like in the way that you control opening up the refrigerator. I mean, so these exercises and things of that nature are utilized to bring one into alignment with the higher part of themselves ultimately. But a lot of times what happens is that a person becomes a servant to those forces in a way that could be despairing, because they're constantly asking for stuff. You know what I'm saying? And so, your life becomes more and more wrapped around. The next thing you know, you're consumed and you don't even know it. You know what I'm saying? So, peace and love to everybody. This is me, Sal Bay, aka Warlock Asylum, and we'll be back shortly. Have a great evening, and I wish you all the best.